Well, good morning, everyone. While they get that working, we'll just introduce. I'm really glad to be speaking after Manuel this morning because really the genesis of this presentation came after a few 3-hour car trips in Madrid with Manuel, where we really started looking at dairy sheep nutrition seriously. Over the ensuing sort of 18 months since we've been with Manuel in Spain. Spring Sheep have had a particular emphasis on how we feed our sheep. So today when I talk to you about nutrition, yes, it's about feeding dairy sheep, but probably at a macro level, this is about setting up a farm system in New Zealand. So about this time last year, we really had a problem at Spring Sheep. We had 2,000 ewes on our property, and we didn't really have any idea about what we were going to feed them to achieve the milk yields that we needed to make our business sustainable. We spent an afternoon down here at Palmerston North with the experts from Ag Research and from Massey University. We spent a lot of time around that exact whiteboard there, and the executive summary of that session was, this is what the textbook says. We're not sure how you're going to implement that in real life. It seems to be pretty tricky, and no one's really done it well for dairy ewes in New Zealand. The next thing we had was Small Ruminant Nutrition System, SRNS, which said if you plug in the weight of your ewe, what you'd like it to produce, it'll spit out the exact diet that you need to feed. Now on top of that, we had a 160 hectare farm in Taupo, which produced a lot of nice grass and lucerne, and we were fortunate enough to have an indoor housing barn and a mixer wagon. So with that as an introduction, we said about the year. There's two graphs here which are going to be quite detailed, but in essence, each of those colours represents a different feed that went into our dairy ewes. We made the call pretty early on that we were going to split the flock into two, so 1,000 ewes in each sample. So you'll see there that the grey bars represent pasture silage, the yellow representing lucerne silage, and the blue colour there representing bought-in grains. You'll see a lighter green at the top where we added some protein into the diet. As you'll see, there are a few chops and changes on the way, which I'll touch on. In December, you'll see here, November actually, we had a sudden change in diet. We tended to cut grass for the sheep. So what happened there was we were trucking along really nicely with our lucerne silage. The ewes were indoors and we said, flip. This is a great opportunity to test something different for New Zealand, and so we brought the grass into them. So that sort of summarises our two systems. So what does that all mean for us? Well, a significant increase in milk yield. The red line there demonstrates the previous season's milk curve, which was about 130 to 150 litres per sheep on average. When we look at this year's lactation, of our 2,000 ewes, we averaged 200 litres, with the top 10% of those well above the 300 litre mark. So a significant increase in milk yield, noting this is the same genetics, so there's no European genetics in this farm yet. It's a farm system change. At a macro level, when we look at our year's milk curve, it's a really interesting thing. With 1,500 less ewes, the milk produced in October of each year was the exact same amount of milk, which represents a significant change in farm system and a different change in farm operating cost. So as that with an introduction, I'd like to take you through 6 lessons from feeding 2,000 ewes for higher milk yield. Lesson 1 was T minus 30. Set up for peak lactation starts well before lambing. We believe it's 30 days, but I could easily be convinced it's 60 days, where we had ewes housed indoors on a dry ration. Now that did a few things for us. One, it taught us about transition, that ewe needs to be well transitioned before she gets onto a lactating diet. It gives a chance for the rumen to get used to what you're going to feed it for the next 200 days. The other things that happened were we actually increased our lamb birth weight significantly, 1.5 kilos to 2 kilos per lamb, which was a really easy way to put weight on lambs and a very labour efficient way to do that. The next thing we noticed was lamb survivability increased, so that was a function of lambing them indoors, yes, but it was a function of healthier, bigger lambs, which was a significant cost saving and a certain benefit to the business. The next lesson was about quality and quantity, and this is something that Dave Stevens is going to touch on in the following presentation. But for us, the single biggest summary here was not all silage is created equal. Test it, and test it. The next one we learnt was that New Zealand contractors are great. They're good at making dairy cow silage, but there is a difference. Sheep have a much smaller mouth. The quality needs to be significantly higher. The chop length comes into it, time of day comes into it. There are a lot of variables here, and there's an education piece required for your local contracting business. Probably lastly, when I talk about quality and quantity, Mid-season procurement is not fun, nor is changing feeds midway through a lactation plan ahead. So that bottom picture now represents spring sheep today with all of next lactation feed sitting stored on hand. When we look at the quality, we had Chaim Leibovich here at the conference just a few years ago where he talked about some of the macro indicators of a dairy used diet. He talked predominantly about the 18% protein. Now what we found this season at Spring Sheep was that while you may have a dietary protein of 18%, the actual amount of protein in the diet and the different forms of protein are very critical. For us, this was a monthly adjustment with testing of the feed done every week to figure out what was actually going into that mixer wagon, what was actually getting put in front of the ewes. We tested the feed in terms of individual feeds, our inventory. We tested the feed as a mix, and we tested what came out of the barn as wastage, so we really had an understanding of what was going into those ewes. The third lesson was really interesting for us. We had traditionally allocated 3 kilos of dry matter per sheep per day in our pasture-based model. It seemed to be the industry standard for what you needed to allocate a dairy sheep. We were pleasantly surprised when putting feed on concrete, using a barn, putting the exact amount into a feed wagon. We couldn't actually get our dairy ewes to eat more than 2.2 kilos, which is fascinating. We then started to wonder, well, what does that mean from a feed conversion efficiency point of view? We had ewes producing about 2 litres at peak this season, which was a significant increase, as you can see on that graph. This graph here demonstrates that on average, we started with feed conversion efficiency about 7 and ended up around that 12 or 13 mark with an average of just under 10 kilos of feed to 1 kilo of milk solid, which for a dairy animal is pretty efficient. We did have to wonder, only feeding a dairy ewe 2.2 kilos, what's happening? Is she mobilising fat and losing weight? Or is that sufficient to make 2 litres of milk and maintain body weight? We were pleasantly surprised when we took a sample of all our ewes to find that they were actually standing still. You know, some losing, some gaining, which is what we would typically expect to see in a lactating animal. The fourth lesson was the hybrid can work well in late lactation. So you'll see by the 2 earlier graphs we displayed that we are big believers in nutrition pre-lambing. We're big believers in nutrition indoors and early stage of lactation. But when it comes to the end of lactation, there are really 2 options to take here, and it probably agrees with what Dave shared this morning from the Spooner Research Station, is that when the pasture is growing, it is an option to be out there. And I think we've heard across the course of this conference that the natural product in the pasture-based system is something that we believe in and we like as an industry, and this just demonstrates that, again, you can have the hybrid system in late lactation. Lesson 5 was cut and carry. You saw on that graph there that we did run out of lucerne silage inventory based on the season and probably a better than expected production out of our sheep and a desire to carry them on indoors. Cut and carry can work, but it is lots of work, and I did have to chuckle when I saw your lawnmower there, David, at the research station, and our team spent a lot of hours on a tractor bringing grass in. You saw on the graph that it worked. We maintained our lactation performance. We still achieved the same as what we were achieving on lucerne, but it was lots of work. The interesting thing was when we changed from a silage, which we knew exactly what it was, to a grass which changed daily, the composition of that diet was significantly different on a daily basis. Testing became critical with pasture. The last lesson, lesson 6, was you are what you eat, and this is something that's really important at Spring Sheep. We are big believers in what happens on farm can directly impact the taste of our product and the quality of it, which is deeply important for our end consumer. So as a summary there, milk quality is 100% linked to the quality of feed. We have experimented with mineral supplementation and the welfare of our ewes in terms of their trace elements and their needs throughout the lactation. Little and often is the summary there. So we can add mineral and some of those finer details to the diet every day, which maintains the level rather than getting to a point where we're in crisis, for example, with B12 and have to put a big spike into the feed to rectify it. So for us, little and often. Stable diet ingredients are absolutely essential. Knowing what's in your inventory and planning ahead to get that as consistent as possible adds to your milk production. The last one there was don't force it, there will be wastage. Putting feed inside on concrete, you get to see every day what the ewes are going to eat and what they aren't going to eat. For us, there was no feed value in what was left over, and for something, for example, as a lucerne stalk, it wasn't worth making the ewes eat it. For us, that ended up being about between 5 and 8% wastage on a daily basis through that period of peak TMR. It is not worth forcing the ewes to eat it. They will crash. So in summary for spring sheep, what next? Well, the European dairy sheep are here. We have treated this year as a dress rehearsal. We've had New Zealand dairy genetics. We've put them indoors, and we've managed through farm system to prove that it is both farm system and genetics hand in hand, which will get this industry to a higher and profitable yielding sheep. For us, we need to further test the hybrid and the outdoor models. We will be able to bring cost of production down by using hybrid earlier. We'll be brave enough now to know that it does work and we can put ewes outside earlier in the spring season. We will be having a massive focus this year on quality of feed, quality of our barn environments, and the quality of our milk. Is that all intrinsically linked together? Finally, as Peter suggested yesterday for Maui Milk, spring sheep are also on the lookout for top operators to join us on our endeavour to build these farm systems, to develop these nutritional programs for dairy ewes, and to figure out how we're going to take this industry to the next level with European genetics. So we are looking for top operators to join us with our nutrition projects at both our Cambridge farm and our Taupo operation. And I'd just like to end by saying the reason there are 6 lessons to share around feeding dairy ewes is because we've made 60 mistakes. And I think the worst thing we could do is not share that with anyone. So if anyone is here and wants to know more than a 15-minute presentation, we are available. The wider spring sheep team are here, and we'd love to share some of those mistakes and some further detail about these lessons. Thank you.